you asked this group of, it was an executive team,
Mhm.
and you asked them to write down how old they were in 1994. It served a very, very good purpose. It was a great icebreaker too. And the responses, I mean, we had a variety. I think the oldest was in the room had been, whether in their 30s in
late
94,
late 20s, maybe 29 or
late 20s.
32, I
And the,
believe.
yes, and the youngest was a couple months old.
Exactly. Um, and this is an
So why,
important, it's
why open up with that
well,
question?
it's an important point to make. And I open up the book the same exact way because what happened in 1994 is like going back in time and looking at harnessing fire, the Gutenberg printing press, the industrial revolution coming from electrical energy, the invention of the microchip. It's the next stage in this massive leap of growth and progress at a macro level. The challenge, though, is the context and the framing, the perspective that a 29, 30, 31, 32-year old had back in 1994 is going to be vastly different than the other individual who was just a couple of months old at the time. It's going to be vastly
Hmm.
different than someone who was born like, my oldest. He is, it's crazy to say this, he's Gen Z, but he was born in 2010. So his experience and your daughter's experiences are very different than our experiences when we're kind of the same time period, is different than someone who was, you know, 29 or 30 back in 94.
Yeah. So why 1994? What's the significance here? Is that, I know you didn't pick just a random date.
Well, I was 13 years old in 1994. And so that would have made me an eighth grader at Bonnet Junior High in Deer Park, Texas. And that was the year that the internet reached the mass consciousness of humanity. I think what's very interesting is the internet was obviously not new,
Right.
but it was new for the majority of people. The majority of people were just getting introduced to the internet back in 1994. I had the opportunity to be logging on, I want to say 2, if not 3 years prior to that, because I would go up to my dad's work on like a Saturday and they would
Mhm.
have a spare computer that was connected to the internet. And I would just sit there and like noodle around and just figure things out. And I remember one time I ended up in a chat room, which now sounds really weird even saying this,
Oh, yeah.
but this is early on. And the chat was about something I was in. It was basketball cards or baseball cards. So I had a very early contextual experience to the internet, connecting with people, and in some cases, people in other parts of the world. Now, if we go back though, there have been some very specific points on this journey because 1994, 2024, that's a 30-year horizon line. And the changes that we've experienced, and more specifically, the exponential changes that we've experienced over that period of time, what have they impacted? They've impacted they've impacted the competitive landscape. They've impacted the buying behavior of people,
Yep.
but they've also impacted the beliefs, the consumer beliefs, and how people connect with one another just in 30 years. You're talking about the phone once again. I think about as a kid, a rotary phone. Like,
Yeah.
go have your daughter try to dial on a rotary phone. It's like, it's very cheap entertainment. You probably buy a rotary phone. And for anyone watching or listening, if you have kids, buy a rotary phone off of eBay. It's like worth the cheap
Yeah.
entertainment.
Well, even, I mean, my son who is 6, even like watching him pick up my cell phone to talk to somebody, he doesn't even know to put it up to his ear.
It's very
It's
true.
speaker. He talks to it. There is no, ear to mouth at all.
But I want to pause on that point. See, when I talk about this idea of the transformation of behaviors, that's a very practical example of a transformation of behavior tied to communication. And if you think, what is marketing, sales, and leadership? Marketing, sales, and leadership is communication, but why? And it's a deeper question that I see a lot of marketing and sales leaders struggle with, in even leadership teams. What is marketing? What is sales? What is leadership? And they say it's communication, it's influence. Something has influenced that behavior for your son. And I can't, once again, my contextual experience, and I'm a nerd here, but I just can't help but think he's talking on a tricorder from Star
Yeah.
Trek, because
Yeah.
that's how they would talk. Like, if you go back and you watch the old Star Treks, even the Star Treks from like the 60s and the 70s, it was a tricorder that they weren't holding up to their ear. They were talking to it like this. So it's like, well, what influenced that belief to then inspire that behavior? I even think with my kids, like, phone conversations or FaceTime conversations, they're video
Of course.
conversations.
Right. It's interesting. I even feel I had a call the other day, and it's almost like I assume now when I'm scheduling a call with somebody, it's going to be on Zoom.
Mm.
If it's not on Zoom, I'm kind of like, oh, we're just talking. No video involved. Which I think is interesting though, because 4 years ago, oh, we're doing a video call? That's terrifying.
You know what? Do you remember when you called me up and you had asked me, you might have even just sent me a message like, "Hey, do you still have a spot for me?" This is like
Yeah,
back at
I DM'd you.
That's what it was. You DM me on Facebook, I think. Or was it
Yes.
LinkedIn? Probably.
Probably
I think it
Facebook.
was Facebook. But then I remember we actually had a Zoom conversation.
This is my
This
first
is
Zoom call.
Are you serious? That was your first
Yeah.
Zoom call? I had no
Uh-huh.
idea. See, that was
Yep.
pre-pandemic. That was like January of 2020.
It was, and I remember thinking, and I took that Zoom call in my classroom. I actually skipped our staff picture to take that call with you. I was hiding out in there, and I remember you sent me the Zoom link, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've never used this. I feel like an idiot. I mean, here I am, about to go, talking to James Robert, who I know is so advanced, digitally and technologically, and I'm trying to make something happen here, but I don't even know what I'm doing right now on this platform.
So see, this is the first time that you've shared this with me. I had no idea of this perspective from
Yeah.
you. And it's what's interesting is how many others feel the way that you feel about any type of exponential technological transformation. And at the time, that was a massive leap for you.
Hmm.
And if you think about what happened with the pandemic, that was an exponential leap of communication capability, i.e., video
Yeah.
first. And
And now
now,
I don't want to go back though.
right. And it's like, if we're not connected on Zoom and you and I have a conversation, it's FaceTime, unless
Yeah.
the connection is horrible. And I was like, okay, we'll just gotta do it the old fashioned way. But I do
Yeah.
feel like there's a lost element of communication when it's voice only. And so you're talking behaviors and beliefs once again.
Hmm.
But if you go back, kind of like how I was pre-internet to a degree. Like, I was logging on probably 91, maybe 92. But then it's like the rest of the world catches up and they're now logging on. And in 1994, the internet, and we've done podcast conversations, like we have featured the Today Show, and some of the
Yeah.
segments that were being aired in 1994 and how they were talking about the internet back then is almost how people were talking about AI now. But just like that experience, my experience with Zoom, I was actually using Zoom back in 2017 was when I first started using Zoom, because I was so sick and tired and fed up of the other platforms like GoToMeeting and what was the other? There was another one that just the user experience was horrible.
Skype.
Skype was one, but it wasn't really conducive for meetings because not a lot of
Yeah.
people were on Skype. It was very I remember doing podcasts actually back probably around 2014, 2015 with Brett King on his podcast, Breaking Banks, and he was using Skype back then. But I started using Zoom, and I like the simplicity of it. And I remember I felt like the weirdo because every time that I would send someone a meeting link, they probably felt like you, like, what is this thing? They didn't want to share their video with me. I was the
Mm-mm.
only one who was sharing video, but I was like, okay, I'm going to be a leader here. I'm going to lead by example because I know the power of body language with communication. And so you can see me, that's fine. I have nothing to hide.
Yeah.
I can't see you, that's okay. That's how you feel comfortable. I'm going to meet you where you're at. And I think when we go down this timeline from 1994 to 2024,
Yeah.
this is nothing more than to provide some perspective, context, and framing into everything that we've experienced within a 30-year period of time. And we might have felt uncomfortable at one point. I mean,
Yeah.
take for example, July 5th, 1994. Bezos transforms the way that we shop forever. I mean, if think about how old you were. I mean, if you were of shopping age, I mean, I was 13 in 94, so I wasn't buying anything online. But I know my parents weren't. They didn't feel
No.
comfortable with that.
Mm-mm.
Um, Same thing, May 18th, 1995. Wells Fargo launches the first online banking platform, transforms the way that we bank. That was weird back then. And now it's just both of them are commonplace.
Well, and one of the things I love that you point out, and I know you did it in this workshop the other day, is you talk about, hey, when we were kids, what did our parents say? Don't run in cars with strangers.
Yeah.
Don't go over to strangers' houses. And
Mhm.
what are we doing now? Getting in Ubers, staying in Airbnbs.
But you, once again, the context of time is important for this because that all transpired in 2008 and 2009. Airbnb was 2008. Uber was founded in
Yep.
2009. Consider this: 1994 to 2009. That's just 15 years, you know? And what was the impetus for that exponential leap of capability? It wasn't the internet. It was almost built on top of the internet. It was the launch of the iPhone in
Oh yeah.
2007.
Yeah.
That that iPhone in 2007, which was really 13 years after kind of the internet reaches the mass adoption of humanity, the iPhone then creates another exponential leap because you have another capability that you're now building on top of. So now the internet is not just you're not just confined to a desktop or to a laptop.
Yep.
The internet now goes with you and you go with the internet.
Yeah. I mean, I think about just you and I in particular and our ages. I think, what are we, 5 years apart?
Yeah.
But we really did. I mean, we grew up with, as the cell phones were coming out, as the iPhones were coming out, we were I mean, I think I was in college when the iPhone came out.
Yeah.
Um, most of my friends really had only had cell phones at that point for a couple of years.
See,
So we kind of like were growing with it.
that's super fascinating. Once again, in just that 5 year difference of time, I had a flip phone, but then I was a very early adopter. Microsoft came out with a hybrid. It was like and this is going to really kind of, you know, throw some age here. It was a hybrid between a Palm Pilot and a cell phone. And so it had like a little slide keyboard on it, but then
Oh, yes.
it had a stylus. Actually,
Yeah.
that was my phone in 2006 because that's when Delina and I got married, and there's a picture from our wedding day, and I'm on the phone, and it looks like a brick in my hand, and that was actually small because if you go back to what the phones were in the mid 90s, I mean it looked like you were
Yeah.
calling in an airstrike. Like
Zach Morris phone.
exactly. But that phone had the internet on it. It did have a more advanced browser back then. And then the iPhone came out literally about a year later after I got that phone. That's crazy
Yeah.
when I get, but what happens here, and maybe for those who are watching or listening or having the same experience, is when you just stop and pause just for a moment, how much things have changed.